Am I on? Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say I am really glad to be back. I would much rather be here than what I had to go through last week, which was just horrible. I don't even know what that was. But it was an illness, and I chalked it up just to, I don't know what it was. It just came, and about 5 days later, I started getting better. But I appreciate the cards, I appreciate the texts, the emails, I appreciate that all. I really do. Because, I don't know. I'm about 8 pounds lighter. I do know that. So, anyway, I appreciate Carrie also for covering for me on the last minute. I do appreciate that very, very much. So, last week, you went over the lessons or the parables of the hidden treasure, the pearl of the great price, and then also should have touched a little bit on the lost coin. And we're going to be touching a little bit on the lost coin again, but moving forward with this week's parables, I'm sure that you received an email. I sent it out to Carrie, and then it went. So this fourth lesson of parables we're going to be talking about the salt and the light. They're together, so we're going to be talking about those, and then we're also going to be going into leaven or yeast and how that works in our life. And then we're also going to be talking about the lost sheep and also the Good Samaritan. So we're kind of going to be covering those because they kind of go together. And that's the way that I have it planned out for tonight. So, so the first thing that we're going to go, I don't have a PowerPoint, and I'm just trying to get caught up with work, and I was able to get the study done. So maybe next week we'll have a PowerPoint, and it'll be a little bit more user-friendly. But so we're going to jump right in, and we're going to let's turn over to the book of Matthew, the 5th chapter. And the 13th verse. Got too many post-it notes, I've decided. So Matthew, the 5th chapter and the 13th verse. Also using a different Bible. Okay. This is where Jesus is teaching about the salt and the light. And we're going to be reading here just a few verses. Starting in verse 13, it says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." So, we're going to break this down a little bit. It starts off and it says, if seasoning or if the salt has no more flavor, what value does it have? If seasoning in general has no more flavor, and salt in particular, what value does that have? None. It has no value at all. If you think about, he was making that comparison way back in the day when they didn't have a lot of preservatives to put into food. So they used salt as a preservative. And if that salt is no good or it has lost its savor, if you are up in your cabinet and you're making dinner and you put something or you want to mix food up and you go to taste it and it just doesn't taste like anything, why would you use that in the meal that you're preparing? You just wouldn't use it. You wouldn't use it. It gets thrown in the trash. It has no use. So it has no value. And how is he making a comparison with the salt of the earth? It says, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? So what is he trying to compare here? Anybody have any thoughts? Janine? He's talking about what? He's talking about our influence as Christians. Okay, so he's talking about our influence as Christians, which is true. So we have to have an effect. We have to have that saltiness, right? In ourselves. Why do we need that saltiness? Why do we need that influence? Jessica?
I was just thinking that if we're the salt of the earth, we stand out and we are valued because of that. And then if there are to be a light of the world, as we are being valued, we will shine. And as we shine, God's glory will show to all.
Okay, and what about if we don't have that salt? Then we have no value. So if we don't have any value and we're in and among the world, it is not going to be towards anybody's advantage, especially not ours. Jackie?
The word that keeps coming up in my mind is
Purpose. Mm-hmm. Good word. Yeah, that's good. Good description. Because yes, we definitely, we do have a purpose here. We have a purpose on this earth. As Christians, we have a duty and obligation, right? Okay. So, and if we don't have that, we don't have a value, we don't have a worth. And what is the opposite of having a worth or a value? So if we don't have worth, it is worthless. So are we worthless? We're worthless if we don't have that, Arlene.
You also said salt's a preservative. So, in a way, God blesses the earth because of the righteous. So, we're preserving the earth, and if we lose that, the world has lost its preservation.
True. True. So if we blend in with that, like you said, what are we actually doing as soldiers of Christ? If we blend in with the world, what are we doing? It's like, what is our value? We don't have a value. Clay? That's exactly right. That is true. Yeah, we won't have a value. We won't have a purpose. It's just like we're just existing, basically. When you put this uses salt, but when you put any type of seasoning on food, what happens? And why do you put it on there? But what happens when you put salt on food? If you need salt and you have to have it, like it enhances the flavor, absolutely. So, it seems like when people sit down to dinner, if you go to a real fancy restaurant, there's not any salt or pepper or anything on the table. It's just done that way. But if you sit down and you want to enhance your palate, I guess if you should say, if you want it to be more tasty, then you put some salt on it, some pepper, or whatever, and that is we need to have that in our lives as far as us living in this world. We need to be the salt. So when he goes on to say, as far as being, Dana?
I'm just going to kind of
Okay.
And so Jesus' point is to send the disciples out to purify a corrupt world.
Right.
They are the salt. You need to go purify.
And remember when we were talking about the mustard seed and how it was so small, and then it grew huge into this bush, okay? We're going to get into the leaven in a minute, and it's going to kind of have that same effect. But like you were pointing out, when Jesus first started and he said, you know, you, John, Andrew, Peter, and he went and picked his disciples to go out and preach the word, there was just a few. There was just a very, very few. And then it just grew. And, you know, this is how he preaches, and this is how he wants the kingdom to be in our life. Elise?
Another point too, Dave and I were both discussing this, we saw side notes about it, because it specifically says that the salt loses its flavor.
Right.
And salt, sodium chloride, is really a stable compound. It doesn't lose its flavor unless it's diluted or adulterated with something else.
Mm-hmm.
So that you don't see the effectiveness of the salt anymore.
Mm-hmm.
One point I think is also making it as you're the salt of the world, you don't get diluted, compromised.
Right.
Tolerant to the other world, then you are diluting yourself and losing respect.
True. Very good point. You don't want to, what does it say? You don't want to conform to the world, but you want to be transformed. We don't want to be diluted down. We want to make sure that we have a separation. When we're here, we're comfortable. We have one purpose, one goal, one mind. We're a unified body. We know what we are doing here. In study, singing, praying, we know what we're doing. But it's when we leave here that is a problem. Because we're going out into a world, and we're not saying everybody, but we're going out into a world that is worldly. And then we get mixed up in all of that. And we have to be strong. We have to keep that salt within us. Any other comments? Carrie?
The salt that Elise was talking about was very rare in Jesus' day, and it was very expensive. So most of the time, the salt that the people that were using that Jesus was talking to, it was mined, but it ended up about 1/3 dirt.
Mm.
And they couldn't seal it like we can today. So as the moisture in the air would hit that, we get that salt, it would start dissolving. And if left too long, what you ended up with was contaminated dirt.
Yeah, yeah. And another thing that I was thinking about after Elise said something about sodium chloride, when you go in for an IV, when you have an IV and you're being administered any type of medication or vitamin or hydration, typically what is in that bag? Sodium chloride. Sodium chloride, 0.9% or 0.45% sodium chloride that's going into your body as a preservative. Keeps it in your body, keeps everything flowing real smooth. They use it for a reason. Anything else? Going on to the second part of that, from verse 14, it says, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Can you hide? Can you hide a city on a hill at night? Can you hide that? No. You can't hide that. It's there. People see it. And then I was thinking also about, I didn't write it down, but I was thinking about lighthouses. You know, they were there for a reason, way up high. So whoever was out on the ocean knew where the shore was, Okay, you know what? There's a shoreline right there. So the lights need to be seen, and we need to have the salt, and we need to have the light. We need to have the light, and we don't need to hide it. You know, there's a kid's song, Little Light of Mine. You know, don't hide it under a bushel. You're gonna keep letting it shine. And they hold it up like this. You know, they really like it a lot. You know, they like that song. I'm sure they do. And I remember singing it when I was little. So we need to individually, we need to have the salt, and we need to glow like lights. And hopefully by doing that, people will see that. They will see that, and they'll know that we are Christians and we're wanting to do what God's will. Margie?
Some time ago, we took a trip to Paso Robles and came back in the dark.
Mm.
And it just reminded me of the scripture going down I-5.
Mm-hmm.
Desolate, basically. But coming home, we'd see lights way off. And it really kind of drove this home to me again.
Yeah.
We may be, I don't know how to express it, but
Yeah.
if you're really living for God and letting that spiritual light shine, it's not going to be hidden. It's going to show.
Yeah. We need to do that. And I love your comment. That is fantastic. It's a very good comment, Margie. Thank you very much. Love to hear that. But yes, we need to have that light in us, you know, and we need to make sure that everybody sees it, right? You know, whether it's, and how are we going to let people know that we have a light in us? How are we going to know that, or how are they going to know that we're Christians? Have you ever talked to somebody on the phone before and thought, just the words that they say, it makes you believe that they have some type of religion, you know? They are God-fearing people. You ever get that idea when you're talking? Because I talk to a lot of people. And it's like, you can really tell who's not. And then you can tell the ones that are. But we should be that in our daily walk, in our daily life. So, I've got a question. How do we not hide our light? And I wrote some things down, and you can comment on them if you want to. So, what I wrote down is, how do we not hide our light? By speaking out when we need to speak out. By not going along with the crowd. By not denying the light that is within us. Sometimes, you know, you just want to fit in. You know, I just don't want anybody to notice me that I'm a Christian. I just kind of want to fit in. We're not supposed to be like that. Arlene?
I had to go to the dentist this week, and the weather, especially up there in the valley, has been so wet that there's been a lot of people commenting about floods. And the Bible has come up in a lot of conversations. And so I end up talking about the flood to a lot of people and God because of it. And there's been a few times when it's been pretty easy. But was one that the guy just kept interrupting me and trying to discount everything. And I was really tempted to finally just say, oh, forget it. But I kept talking to him as long as I was there
Mm-hmm.
because I thought, well, I may not get through to him, but maybe somebody else is listening in the other room, you know.
Yeah.
So I just kept at it. But I was really tempted to just say, okay, forget this guy.
Yeah. Yeah. And you never know. And that was like earlier in one of the lessons when we first started. You just never know who that's going to fall on. You don't know who you're going to be a positive influence to you. You just don't know that. But anyway, we need to be a beacon of truth, and we don't need to be shutting our light down and off from the rest of the world. We need to be solid. Anybody else have any comment before we go to the Clay? Mm-hmm. Right. Mm. Yeah. Simple. Dave.
Something that came to mind about both of these is that there's a kind of readiness that's part of that. Like when the cook goes to get the salt, it's there, it's ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing has to happen. Ready.
Right.
Same with the light, like a flashlight. Batteries charged up, ready to go. But it made me think about this news guy. When I saw on the news, there was a guy in another state, weatherman, Mississippi, I think it was, and he was talking about this huge tornado that was about to hit this town
Mm.
recently. And he just was overcome and just said, "Be with them, peace."
Mm.
Right there in front of everybody, in front of the world.
Wow.
Apparently it spread like wildfire.
Wow.
But and he was later interviewed by someone else here,
Yeah.
but he was ready. I mean, it was right there. It just came out.
Yeah.
And
That's
so I think there's something to that.
well, and you knew what he had in mind. You knew where his thoughts were. Definitely. Anything else? Okay, let's continue on. Let's talk about some leaven. Let's go to Matthew, the 13th chapter. Matthew 13. Too many pieces of paper. Okay. So, Matthew the 13th chapter and the 33rd verse. It says, "And he told them still another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour until it worked through all the dough." That's it. And then it goes on and says in verse 34, Jesus spoke all things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. But here we find a woman that the kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour until it all worked through the dough. Now, it's a very short verse, but it has a lot of meaning. Clay, do you have your New King James Version there? Could you read that, verse 33, Matthew 13, and verse 33?
Another parable he spoke to them, the kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal till it was all leavened.
Okay, and 3 measures is approximately 60 pounds. So she took the leaven or the yeast and put it in to the wheat or the dough, and she mixed it. And what happened eventually? What happened with the yeast or the leaven that was in the dough? What happened to that dough? It increased. Arlene? It did. It did. Correct. Yes. So, do we think that was Jesus making a comparison here that the kingdom of heaven is like leaven or yeast? Is that what he's saying? It says right there, the kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour. And so the unexpected is that he said that the kingdom of heaven is like yeast. Wasn't yeast a bad thing? Wasn't yeast at one time a bad thing? They did. Yeah. Right. If you were a first century Jew, and knew the Old Testament, what was it about that yeast to them? How did they view that? Did they like it? Was it something that was clean, or was it unclean? Clay.
Mainly it was for the preparation of the showbread or the Lord's Supper bread, or also when they were supposed to be able to take and move out in a hurry, they weren't supposed to sit there and wait for the bread to rise,
Mm-hmm.
so there was not supposed to be any leaven in it.
Right. In chapter 16 of Matthew, and the 5th verse, it says, when they went across the lake, the disciples forgot to take bread. Be careful, Jesus said to them, be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So yeast here, was it good or was it bad? Bad. It was bad. He even said, beware. Janine?
Yeah, even the Corinthian church was to purge out the old leaven.
That's right. Exactly. So when I was studying this, it said just a couple of chapters before, in verse 33, the kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds. But then over here in verse 6, it says, be careful, be on guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So he's using it in a negative term, and then he used it in a positive term earlier. Jessica.
My commentary is saying that it's an illustration of false doctrine or hypocrisy in this particular regard.
Right. Was it because of their hypocrisy? Right? The Pharisees and the Sadducees. It was because of their hypocrisy. Correct, yes. And that's what I came up with as well. Janine, were you referring to Paul in 1 Corinthians, like the 5th chapter? Okay. So 5 in what, 7? 6 through 8. So 6 through 8? Okay. I do have that. It says, cleanse out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump. Bring in righteousness and holiness. That is what needed to be done. Carla? Mm-hmm. Correct. Right. True. That is very, very, very true. It's like like I said earlier, it's like the mustard seed and what it grows into. The leaven or the yeast is very small, but it grows into something that is very, very big. So the kingdom of God is like the woman that has the leaven, that put it in the dough, and then it rose. Because the kingdom's still being established, still to this day. And it all started, when Jesus, like I said earlier, appointed the apostles to go out and preach, to set up churches, appoint elders, deacons, and preach the word. And we're still doing that today. Carrie?
One of Randy's recent lessons talked about because of the persecution that took place in the city of Jerusalem, there in Acts chapter 8, the Christians began spreading. And it's amazing how the gospel began to permeate through all of the geographies around
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
region of Syria, and then Asia Minor, and even into Europe. So it's much like that leaven he was talking about. The gospel will spread.
Right. Right, exactly. When you talk to somebody and you plant that seed, or you throw that leaven in there in your dough, or you take that mustard seed and you apply it or you give it to somebody, that whole process is part of an internal change. It's an internal change inside of that person that becomes external, right? It becomes an external outgoing of that person. You see what I'm saying? So you plant the seed, it's internally in their heart, but yet what happens is that hopefully that it sticks and it falls on the good soil, and then they take it and they develop it and they study and they produce this, and it just grows. It grows, and it becomes something that is very, very, very good in this world as far as Christianity. That's how everything starts. It's powerful. It's very powerful. It starts out real small, but it becomes powerful and becomes transformative. And it starts with just a little bit, and it turns into something that is very, very big. It's mysterious. It is really kind of a mysterious thing, the way that it all happens.
You can see that in Acts 2 where, they started off 3,000, and then just grew, the church grew rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
So, when the word spreads,
That's true.
people's heart, it can really spread like fear or and then, they'd have a lot of bread. So
That's
spread the word across the world.
Yeah.
Kingdom can really grow.
Yeah, it's very, very true. Okay.
This may be a wrong interpretation, but it also takes work because the woman had to actually put the leaven into the flour. It didn't make bread on its own.
No, it didn't. In fact, I remember my mother. She cooked all the time. All of the time. Whether it was breaking bread, going out to the garden and picking whatever needed to be picked for that evening. But I remember her making bread, loaves of bread, and I remember her making cinnamon rolls. Okay? And she would have yeast in the bread, and she would have yeast in the cinnamon rolls, and she would take that and knead it, and then she would put it in a cupboard in the darkness. She would put it in the darkness, but it still produced. It still grew. It still, So I think that if we have this seed that is planted inside of us and we study and we grow, then we're part of that kingdom of God. We just need to make sure that we apply ourselves where we need to be. Is there any other comment before we go on? Jessica?
Like what you're saying,
Mm-hmm. That is very, very true. Yeah, thank you. That's really good. Okay, we're going to go on to Luke. The book of Luke, 15. We're going to hit on the lost sheep for a little bit. Verses 3 through 7. It says, Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep. I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 or righteous persons who do not repent. Okay. I know this sounds like the parable of the lost son and the parable of the lost coin. But we're going to talk about the lost sheep for a second. Why do you think that the shepherd left those 99 sheep and went after the one that was lost? Arlene?
One in the fold didn't need any help
Okay.
at that time. They were safe.
They were safe. They were in the sheepfold. They were there. He knew, he saw that they were safe. They had each other, and this one was really lost. So I'm going after this one. Okay? So the shepherd, in this story here, Jesus is depicting the shepherd as whom? As Jesus. Yeah, that's what I gather. And I'll tell you why in a little bit. But so the shepherd went out and got that lost sheep, because that sheep being lost, not just lost. Yeah, he was lost. But what else was going on that could have happened to that sheep that was lost? He's in danger. Exactly. Things can happen. He was in danger. And that's like us. We can be gone. We could be lost. And we could definitely be in danger.
And the sheep has no idea that the shepherd's looking for them. The sheep just wandering around.
True. That is very true. That's right. And each of those sheep has a very, very high value. And that shepherd needed to go after that sheep. And he felt comfortable enough to leave and to go after the sheep. And it's important that we understand that, because this shepherd went out and diligently went after that sheep. Went after that sheep. And then, we may be able to understand God's forgiveness. We may be able to understand His mercy, His grace. He died on the cross willingly, the greatest sacrifice ever, and so that we all might have a hope of eternal life, right? Okay. So He did that, but yet He is also saying that we're going to rejoice over that one lost person, because that person is found again. And not only are we going to rejoice, but it's going to be even better that person came back. So what kind of a love is that? If you are lost, totally lost, and then Jesus, not only did He die on the cross in the most cruel way that you can even imagine, but yet he goes after you. He wants you back here. He wants you back. I mean, that's the type of love that I cannot even fathom, because you're rebelling and you're out there, and then yet you're coming back, and he wants you to be back. He searches and he searches for sinners, and then he joyfully, he forgives them. This is why this kingdom exists, and he wants it to be successful. Elise?
Also making the point, he said, told the parable right after the Pharisees saying, Jesus is eating with the sinners and the tax collectors.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Pharisees was kind of disdained him for doing this. So this was making a point that you don't shun the sinners,
Right.
you go after them
That's right.
and bring them back.
That's exactly right. Lisa?
I think it's taken even further in 1 John 3:16. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters.
Correct. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. Very, very good point. I know that Randy had a lesson last year on May the 22nd. And he was talking about this lost sheep. And he had indicated that this lesson that he taught was about Jesus's future. This is Jesus's future about his people, about his creation, about God's creation. And I thought it was a real good parallel between that and how, we have so many losses here in the very first part of this. Suppose one of you had 100 sheep and loses one of them, and then it goes on and it says there were 99 in an open country, go after the lost sheep. And I mean, there's probably lost sheep all over this country. And we need to be aware of that. One thing that I thought of, and then I'll close, is that Janine, go ahead.
I'm just saying, 2 Peter 3:9 tells us that he is so long-suffering, he's not willing that any of us should be lost.
That's right. That's right. He wants everybody to come to redemption. When I was reading, before I got sick, when I was reading about the lost coin that Carrie did last week, I was thinking about how this woman, she had 10 silver coins, which was considered about a day's wage. Anyway, she lost one of these coins. And then it goes on and it says that she swept the house and searched carefully until she finds it. How many houses back then had carpet or floors? I'm sure that they probably had dirt floors. That's what I was thinking. They probably had dirt floors. How easily that would have been to be lost. That coin would have been lost, but she searched until she found it. So we have that mercy, we have that grace. We'll get into, we almost made it all the way through. I have to talk about the Good Samaritan, so that'll be on the list next week. All right, thank you for your comments.